I feel that saying this prayer for healing is so important, so helpful to us. All of those names that are in the chat, and even beyond names, folks are putting in whole cities and states for challenges and crises and traumas that individuals are facing and that whole communities in our nation is facing. I want to talk to you a little bit about holiness. And this idea of holiness is so strange. And yet, after the prayer for healing, I feel like we need to talk about holiness, because most of us think that it is only about blessings, or that it's about prayers, or how do we do certain kinds of rituals. And I think that's a part of it, but I also think it's so much more. In the Torah, it says that God spoke to Moses and God said, speak to the whole Israelite community and say this to them. And it says, Kedoshim Tihiyu. It often says, it's often translated as you shall be holy, but I really think it's you must be holy. Holiness is in your future. You will be holy because I, your God, am holy. That's simple. I think the rest of the Torah can close up. That's our mission statement. If we needed a mission statement as a Jewish people, I think that's it. Be holy because God's holy. It's so important, I think we should start making t-shirts. Be holy. That's it. Nike's got nothing on that. And there's all kinds of holiness. There's discussions of relationships and inappropriate relationships. There is a message about having reverence for your parents. You can't have a molten God pretending that that God is so important that it's going to lead you to do naughty things, bring you astray from ultimate truths. You can't pick your land and your vineyard bare. You have to leave what drops in the corners of your fields for the poor and for the stranger. Kedoshim, this Torah portion says you can't insult the deaf and you can't put a stumbling block in front of a blind. You have to pay the wages for a laborer. You have to remember Shabbat, and you can't hate your kinfolk in your heart. And I think the hardest one of all, rebuke your neighbor. There's other things that I haven't said, to be sure, but Kedoshim, which means holiness, Kedoshim is about doing the right thing. It's about not standing idly by. It's about actively choosing to make difficult decisions, which gets tiring. And none of those things that I've read are out of date. They might have more formal language than we would use, but none of it is out of date. For example, it says you can't put a stumbling block in front of the blind, and I think we have a ton of stumbling blocks in front of us. Last night, I was sad because there was only 20 people. And still, it was amazing that we had 20 people who gather together to hear about issues relating to the transgendered community, something which most of us know really very little. They have stumbling blocks. And they have stumbling blocks because most of America has stumbling blocks. My entire growing up has given me images of transgender people as other, as strange, as something ugly or threatening about them, because we have been giving these stumbling blocks that make it difficult to see somebody's humanity, that make it so that we tell people to prove to us why this is important instead of listening. I think a whole nation has a stumbling block in front of them. And in turn, we add more to our trans brothers and sisters and ones. Why do I need to understand why somebody is making the decisions that they are making in order to stay healthy and to seek wellness? Why do so many of us feel like we need proof or evidence that it is appropriate. And I think because of our blindness, we tolerate those stumbling blocks. There's over 100 pieces of anti-trans legislation around the country in our different states, challenging individuals from getting the health care they need or protections in their schools or workplaces. Here's another challenge from those texts. Kedoshim says you can't pick your land or vineyard bare. You have to leave what's there, corners of your field, whatever you drop. There's all of these rules. For the pieces of fruit that you miss, you have to leave it for the poor and for the stranger. I think our American society has a problem with taking, the pulling of every resource without much concern. It's concern about the earth, concern about its inhabitants. It's sort of like the giving tree, where the tree is expected to give and give and give until it has nothing less because we can't be satiated. But the text says that our land isn't only for us. Yes, we can use it, we can profit from it, we can feed our families, we can benefit from its use, but we have to use it responsibly, making sure that all are provided for, especially the most vulnerable among us. Whenever the Torah says that we need to do something like protect the corners of your fields or don't pick your property bare because people need to eat from it, the poor, the stranger, the widow, the orphan, those are the people in the Torah's context who are the most vulnerable. Remember, it's not a stranger, meaning somebody who comes from another place or somebody you don't know. It's somebody from a different tribe. And in the ancient world, if you left your tribe and entered into the territory of another tribe, your very life was at risk. So it's the poor, it's someone from outside of your community, the widow and the orphan, the most vulnerable. Today, maybe it's not exactly them, but we have people who are vulnerable. We have people beyond these four archetypes who are disenfranchised, marginalized, impoverished, challenged. I want to give you one other example, another difficult example. I said one of the hardest mitzvot might be the issue of rebuke. The Torah says, don't hold on to the hate in your heart, rebuke your neighbor. Some people think rebuke is like a punishment. This isn't about punishment. We rebuke, we share feedback, sometimes even criticism about someone else's behavior in order to help make a change for the good. This past year, I have heard from so many of my rabbinic colleagues who have listened to eulogies and tributes of rabbis who have harassed and intimidated countless women for years. Those women colleagues who have been victims get to be victimized all over again. And the people who knew about these things stayed silent. We're not supposed to gossip. Well, this isn't gossip. Rebuking your neighbor is going to a source and say, you've done something wrong. People who knew would stay silent. Rabbi Gila Ruskin published an article, and she highlights and explains how rebuking one's neighbor is one of those most challenging mitzvot that we can possibly fulfill because we don't want to get involved. And she points out that in the Hebrew, the verb is doubled. There's an expression, it's hocheach tochiach. You hear the root letters of those two words that really have the same foundation, but the verb about rebuking, it's like you should really rebuke somebody. One of our Talmudic teachers, who goes by the name Rava, he teaches that it's upon us to rebuke even authority figures. Since this is twice as hard to reach somebody or rebuke somebody in a position of power or authority, we have this doubling of the verb. And it's extra hard because we're fearful of consequences, backlash. Another Talmudic sage, Elazar ben Azariah, he did not rebuke his neighbor for desecrating the Sabbath. And the Talmud explains that now the sin belongs to the witness, Elazar, as well as his neighbor. When we don't rebuke for the sins of others, we don't comment on their misses or their potential hurt of other people, it's likely the hurt's going to continue. Sometimes it is not calling somebody out, but I have shared my own experiences of being called in, giving somebody a chance to make something right. Those who don't rebuke the rabbi that I first mentioned, who was engaged in harassment, doubled the guilt, doubled the avera. Others might have been spared, hurt, and embarrassment if just one had the gumption to speak a word of truth. This great Hasidic teacher of ours, Reb Nachman of Wroclaw, would teach that the way to be holy is to create safeguards against immorality. To create safeguards against immorality. Now, he's talking about himself, but what happens when a whole community is facing stumbling blocks that we have been trained to put in people's paths without realizing they're even stumbling blocks? Can we make those kinds of changes? I think we can. I think we have to. I'm here tonight to tell us, all of us, and I include myself in this, that if we act godly by acting holy, if we imitate God, remember the beginning, you shall be holy, you must be holy because I, God, am holy. Well, if we become holy when everybody is seen, when everybody feels protected, when everybody can get the health care they need, when all are fed and cared for, when somebody who's in crisis is going to get a casserole, whether it's about their physical health or their mental health, if we can live in safe places with access to clean water, if we can speak truth to power, Torah to power, and be heard without assuming that nobody's going to listen, I think the world will change. I do. I believe it. And I hope and strive for our own congregation can be just one of the many models for that. That's what we're trying to do here. Not to preach to make us feel guilty, not to encourage people to feel bad or wrong. It is all about the potential for growing. All of those B'nai Mitzvah kids I meet with and work with, I ask them all to teach us so that we can grow. That's it. You don't have to agree. And if you don't, we can talk about it. Let's talk about it. I'll share honestly, and I'll listen deeply. But if it's for the sake of holiness, to be godly, then we have to consider some of those things like stumbling blocks, insulting the deaf, those who can't even hear and would never know, thinking about the wages of that laborer, considering how do we take from the land without ensuring that everybody has enough, and about the rebuke. That is not fun, and it's not easy. And it's even worse to be on the receiving end of it, which I have been and I will be again. But that's how we grow. And that's how we seek holiness. That's what I'm seeking. I hope you pursue that with me, because you have incredible power and influence and love and decency for us to really bring healing to a broken world.